The close range meta is in a pretty good spot, especially since they didn't put any nerfs through today. It's a pretty wide open meta. We're going to talk about 8 different weapons today. We're going to talk about some of the different variables that make these the top weapons. I did stretch it out a little bit further. I think it's only about 5 or 6 weapons that are truly in the meta conversation, but I added a couple in there in case maybe you didn't have one of these leveled up coming back into the game. TTK's spreadsheet has already kind of been updated, so these aren't a surprise to anyone who's been following. Luckily, I hit the mark with these ones with that first initial loadout video that I put out, but there's still a ton of different options in here. If you didn't necessarily like some of these options here, maybe you want to do with the MCW conversion kit, there's a few different things to work with there. So when it comes to close range meta, we're going to focus on this green side of the chart, and then we'll scroll over to the long range or the second damage drop off. I'm trying to do something a little bit different. If you think there's other things I should be including in some of these meta videos, let me know in the comments. I've kind of kept it simple to focus on a few key elements. This is the likely close range TTK. Yes, we know the C9 can kill a little bit faster, but if you get 2 stomach or limb shots or leg shots, you're going to get this slower TTK. So this is the more practical TTK. And a lot of times, maybe if you shoot accurately, upper body, head, you'll probably get the faster TTK, but there's instances where it's going to be 656, and that is not a particularly good TTK. The other thing I have here is the damage drop off without the barrels. So in some instances, maybe on the Saug, you might want to run the barrel that's going to give you the longest range versus maybe some of these other ones like the Jackal or Superi, you do something similar, but maybe not for the C9, maybe not for the Kompakt, and maybe for the PPSH. That's kind of how you would build out the guns. And then we have the AK-74 in here, which is just ridiculously busted as both an SMG and a sniper support. Here's the meta mag size. You could put the bigger one on, but generally up close in the faster TTKs, you don't need as many bullets. This helps a little bit with the aim down sight time, the sprint to fire time, and a few of those types of variables. And then I have the average damage. This is the average damage per bullet that these are doing. And then that's translated with the damage per mag, and then that's converted to downs relatively if you're pretty accurate. I could make this 50% accuracy, 30%, 80%. End of day, we just kind of keep it there. If you're fairly accurate with the gun, you're going to get close to this number. If you're not that accurate, you're going to have some issues. The reason why this one's yellow here, highlighted under the next TTK, is AK-74 goes up to 43 meters. It kind of laps all of these guns for that range and is super forgiving in that sense because its TTK is still ridiculously fast, faster than pretty much all of these practically. And then we also have some issues with these ones having much shorter range. So keep in mind, it's going to be 552 for the AK, and the rest of the blue kind of doesn't matter unless you're really using it as sniper support, and it is easily hands down the best sniper support. So we go ahead and scroll over here. Now we can see the blue side. And then we can see that we have the Kompakt, not killing particularly fast, but it goes up to 20 meters, 700 for the PPSH. Saug gets a little bit weak there. You could probably push that out again with the barrel. 675 KSV, pretty solid. Jackal ends up being much better at range than it is up close. It does drop off, but not as much as a lot of these. It only bumps up by about 80 milliseconds versus some of the other ones a little bit more, over 100 milliseconds. So it's a little bit more forgiving in its drop off in TTK. Same thing with the Superi. It's not as good. That's really where it struggles at range. I thought I'd include that one because it's still kind of one that people like. I think the Lockman is one that people like as well, but that TTK is even slower than this gun. So it really kind of edges it out that way. And then we have the C9, which comes in decent up there with the AK at the furthest range, but again, remember that the AK actually has a TTK of 552, so that's really what's going to separate it. But again, it has multiple weaknesses that you may not want to use it for, especially at close range, and we'll go ahead and discuss that. So we'll go ahead and go to the firing range with some of these. I'll go ahead and talk about some of the different various things that we're going to be working with. So we have the Jackal. I use the VMP variant. With the attachments, I'm actually putting those on screen so we can actually spend more time in the firing range, less time in the menus. So this will be for the VMP. Overall, pretty clean iron sights. I think that's battle pass part of it. If you don't like the iron sights, or you like the normal ones, or you don't have access to it, it's not really a deal breaker. It's just they look different. I like them. That's how it ends up working out. Pretty okay gun overall. But Obviously, we saw it has its pros and cons there with the TTK, damage per mag, and stuff like that. One of the things that we're typically looking for is the ADS speed of these guns to be right under 200 milliseconds. If they can be faster, that'd be a W. You can see this one feels much weaker at that 20 meter range, where a lot of them have that damage drop off. Overall, pretty solid guns. I would use these if you're really bored with the other options. Even though it has low recoil, that TTK is atrocious once you get outside of that initial damage drop off. That moves up to our next set of weapons. We got the KSV. And like I said earlier, you really want that ADS to be 200 milliseconds or less. That's usually where the close range metas have always sat. And with the faster TTKs, it's even more of an issue to make sure that you're ADSing much faster. I am aware of a laser. I'm not going to incorporate any of those on my loadouts. I know that Exclusive Ace covered it. People have told me about it for months now, I think a few months, and then I think True Game Data just put out something about that. If you're interested in the pros and cons of the laser, I am not interested in using that, so I'm not going to recommend it. But if you've done enough analysis on it, or you've watched those videos and you decided that, oh, you know what, I like the ability to ADS and fire at the same time, and the laser, whatever, go for it. I still like the current setups that I have for the individual weapons. C9, again, this is that MP5 version that we pretty much have had for a while. The recoil, I think, is pretty good. I think in general, a lot of the close range meta weapons, these are pretty close. I think the WSP 9 is still pretty solid. The Swarm you could use, but again, those all have deficiencies. I think where they've landed is good. I really want to see them buff some more of the long range options so we get a little bit more viability in the long range meta beyond just the AMAX, the AK, the Kilo, and the Sniper, right? Brings us to the PPSH. And even though this one's pretty good, it has decent fire rate, for whatever reason, people just kind of avoid it. I think it gets a little weaker and harder to use at that middle range. And one other thing I'll point out here, even though people ask in the comment section, is like, what about 8 attachments? Let's be honest. Most people aren't getting their 8 attachment loadout, especially now that you can't buy the gun directly from the buy station. That's even fewer people that are getting double loadouts. If you are an extreme sweat and you're getting double loadouts in a match, you are in the 1%. The average person or in teams is not and will not be doing that. They're going to be grabbing an overkill loadout, getting 2 of 5 attachment guns. Maybe they come back late. Maybe you make a couple other decisions, but in general, that's just ultra sweat stuff. Kompakt here. Overall, I'm a fan of the gun. I think it fires fast. The Florlu one works really well. It's just you will bleed through bullets pretty quickly. So you just got to make sure you're on top of that. Depending on how you want to do it. This one, you really can't afford to go with the smaller mag. So I think it's really kind of how you're going to build out the gun. Super fast fire rate, kills very fast that we saw there with the TTK charts. It's just going to come down to how you want to utilize the weapon. Then it gets into here with the AK and the Saug. So I'll talk about the Saug first and explain why the AK. So the Saug is kind of my main go-to if I'm going to use a rifle. If I'm going to be using an HDR, which is currently the long-range sniper meta, I will combine that with an AK. Because of that versatility as a sniper support, nothing really comes close. As we saw those damage ranges in TTKs, AK is going to stand alone. It also has a little bit more bullet velocity than these guns. Its biggest problem is if you're on keyboard and mouse, you're probably going to want to put on an optic, so you lose out on an attachment. Personally, I like the better visibility, so I use an optic. There you go. You really don't have to use a barrel, especially if you're comparing this with other SMGs. So it's hands down better in those ways, but it is hard to get this thing to 200 millisecond ADS. It will be slightly slower. I've done my best to get it down as much as possible with the quick draw grip, which definitely does help. And the other part that some people may struggle with is because it is a rifle, it's going to have other slower handling characteristics. And then the slower fire rate generally makes guns harder to use. So it is more unforgiving, but it is hands down one of, if not the best option to use. 100% for sniper support. But if you actually want to use it for close range meta, it's also going to be in the mix as well. So let me know, what are you guys a fan of right now? I'm sure there's some other sleepers in there. They obviously took care of the snake shots really quickly. I know there's a shotgun with Dragon's Breath or something. I'm not really a fan of covering that nonsense. I don't want that to plague the game. It'll get patched probably anyways if it's actually annoying and not just clickbait. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.